A very warm welcome back to the Saturday Five. As always, thank you very much for your emails and messages about tonight's topics. Ali says, Benjamin is right.
What? What?
All the Reform team have jumped ship. Up to them, but don't want to hear them preach anymore. Well, I mean, I imagine Ben Habib would argue that he hasn't jumped ship. Richard Tice, our very own former Belinda de Lucy, she may argue too. But John says, after the shenanigans of Trump and his alleged support for withholding funding for Ukraine, Farage appears to be siding with the wrong side. Well, viewers will have some thoughts on that, I'm sure. Thank you for those opinions. Now, though, it's time for our next debate. I'm going to go next. I've decided I'm putting my foot down. I was honestly, genuinely quite heartened by these scenes, right, where you've got this cinema in Finchley in London. It's called the Phoenix Cinema. And they had an act of defiance against censorship. And the Jewish community there, there's quite a large Jewish community there, stood against threats and intimidation. Now, I've been pretty depressed since October 7th, to be honest, so seeing Jews and their allies rally at the Phoenix Cinema to actually defend a film shown about Hamas's massacre on October 7th, the Nova Music Festival in particular, despite a pro-Palestine mob demanding it be cancelled, going as far as to vandalise the cinema itself. These people draped themselves in Israeli flags, but they also stood, by the way, with the British flag. You don't see that much on the pro-Hamas marches, do you? They boldly stood up to a new wave of anti-Semitism and cancel culture, actually echoing, I think, the spirit of those who stood against fascism in the 1930s. And that's what I think this is. I think this is fascism, and we need to stand up against it. Free expression shouldn't be silenced, and I think maybe, just maybe, there are people left in this country willing to stand for truth and for Britain.
Free expression shouldn't be silenced, but you also want to ban the pro-Palestine marches, don't you?
They're free to. They've said since October 7th, Albie, they've ranted about how much they want jihad and intifada. I think they've had enough.
You want to ban protests.
Ban the protests, but they can say whatever they want.
But you say that free expression should be allowed. Tell me, how does that make sense?
It makes sense because they are spreading poison and extremism on the streets of London. Have free speech, but you do not get to call for jihad and intifada on the streets of Britain.
The vast majority of the tens of thousands of protesters who go out and protest in absolute disgust at what is going on in Gaza, the hardship that people are facing, are not calling for intifada, and they are not Hamas supporters. They just want peace. And what I really dislike, Darren, is when people like you say, oh, pro-Hamas marches, hate marches. These people want peace. That's what they want. I was in Oxford last weekend for my sister's graduation, and I saw the tents who were camped out my sister's college.
Oh, and you said, how brave, how brave, how noble.
At first I thought, you know, this is so stupid, these people are so annoying, what are they even doing? But then I thought about the conditions of people in Gaza at the moment who are living in tents in much worse conditions than outside of an Oxford college. And I thought, you know what, actually, these protests are for something, and it's not just something we debate on television. There are people starving and dying of exposure in Gaza because of what is going on, and it is perfectly reasonable for people to protest in their disgust about that, as well as it's reasonable for people to want the hostages to be released.
Look, at the end of the day, the problem with these protests, when you go to somewhere like East Finchley, where there's a large Jewish community, it's a deliberate act to intimidate the local Jewish community. And I know that there was a film being shown specifically in that cinema, but that's not the point. You should, if you care about peace and you care about freedom of speech and your right to protest, surely going to protest against someone else's freedom of speech is completely counterintuitive.
And I also think you ought to be ashamed of yourself, actually, for standing on the side of those who want to censor a film because it shows the facts about a massacre in which young...
I didn't mention the film in my argument at all.
Someone else speak,
You're putting words into my mouth. Be accurate.
You did not want them to watch a film. You wanted a film to be censored. You support these people.
I don't support them.
You just said, oh, how brave, how noble, how brave.
That's not what I said. You're making things up. Darren, have you taken acid or something? Are you seeing and hearing things? That is not what I said. I was talking about the protests in in
let
general.
Me finish a point?
Well, be
Will you
accurate
let
then.
me finish
Be
a
accurate.
point? Will you let me
Be
finish
accurate.
a point? Or shall we all just call it a day
Be
right
accurate.
now? Go home.
Be accurate.
You support those who want to silence a film showing young Jewish people being massacred at a music festival, and you side with people that do that. That's not progressive. That's not liberal. You are putting yourself on the wrong side of history.
You are making things up.
Look,
no,
you
should be ashamed.
I actually have some sympathy with them because, their beloved Iranian president has just died. They had to swap calling for Intifada to start calling Interflora so they could get the reef. These people have had a tough week, right? You'd have some sympathy with them. In seriousness, I actually think what's happened here is really helpful because it wouldn't be acceptable just to protest a Jewish film festival. That wouldn't be OK either. But this was a film about the massacre, and yet they still wanted to stop it and were aggressive and were trying to prevent the Jewish community going about their lives. So we should be grateful that they showed us who they are. This isn't about Palestine. This is about an anti-Semitism that says that those Jewish people in the area that is basically their own community, where most Jews live in London, that they can't record the events of their own people being massacred.
Absolutely
they have shown us who they are, and it is deeply bigoted.
Georgia, I also applaud the cinema, actually, for not kowtowing into saying, well, it's just safer for us to remove the film.
Absolutely. I think often nowadays too many companies kind of buckle at the first sign of disagreement from the public. So really brave for the cinema to carry on and show the film. And I think what we're missing here is that among the protesters, there's obviously diversity, as you're saying, Gal, but I think in this instance, if you're graffitiing and trying to intimidate a cinema because they're showing evidence of a terrorist attack, which was brutal and disgusting, I think you're not pro-Palestinian, you're not pro-human, you're just anti-Israel and anti-the Jewish people, which is unacceptable.
You know what my major concern with all of this is that there's been such a lack of crackdown of certain... I mean, again, there's, like Albie said, there is peaceful people in these protests, but there's been a lack of response from the Metropolitan Police and our security services that has allowed this to breed even further than it should have been allowed. And so you've given rise to these more extremist people to say, why don't we just show up at East Finchley? Let's go and intimidate the local Jewish people. Imagine if the EDL went to somewhere in East London, like Southall, and said, you know what, we're just going to go march up and down the streets
in West London.
Sorry, beg your pardon. Beg your pardon. And that would be deemed massively inappropriate, and the Met Police would be there in minutes getting them all out of the city.
Have you got what it takes to be a reasoned presenter? Well, send us a short clip of yourself to join@reasoned.uk and we might be seeing you on this very channel very soon indeed.